It's 5 in the morning and you're crying in the shower. Again, hot water streams down your face, mixing tears with steam, and for a moment you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. You close your eyes and feel the weight of every failure, every failed attempt to fix yourself, every self-help book that promised a new version of you, but only made you feel more broken than before. Everyone talks about rebuilding, about rising from the ashes like a phoenix, but you're tired of trying to fly. You're exhausted from pretending it's possible to become whole again when the truth is that some cracks never heal, some pieces never go back in place. And maybe that's exactly the cruel and honest beauty of human existence. Franz Kafka knew this better than anyone. He once wrote, "You do not need to leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. Do not even listen, simply wait. Do not even wait. Be quite still and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you to be unmasked." Kafka wasn't suggesting passivity. He was revealing something deeper about human nature, that our strength doesn't come from constantly rebuilding ourselves, but from learning to inhabit our own fragments with dignity and even with a strange form of grace. Think about Maria's story, a 32-year-old woman who spent the last 5 years trying to find herself after a devastating divorce. She tried yoga, therapy, meditation, changed careers twice, cut her hair drastically, tattooed a phoenix on her back believing it symbolized her rebirth. But on an ordinary Tuesday, while drinking coffee alone in her kitchen, she had a revelation that left her in tears. She didn't need to be reborn. She needed to stop running from the woman she had become through pain. The emotional scars she carried weren't flaws to be corrected, but maps of a journey that had transformed her into someone deeper, more empathetic, more real than she had ever been when she considered herself whole. Modern society sells us a seductive lie about personal transformation. It whispers in our ears through inspirational posts, weekend workshops, and self-appointed gurus that we can completely reinvent ourselves, that we can leave the past behind like old clothes and emerge as totally new versions of ourselves. But Kafka understood the futility of this desperate search for an immaculate identity. In his works, the protagonists never find redemption through heroic transformation. Joseph K. in The Trial never discovers his innocence. Gregor Samsa never returns to being human. K. never reaches the castle. And it's precisely in this apparent tragedy that the deepest Kafkaesque wisdom resides. When you accept that you won't rebuild yourself, something extraordinary happens. You stop wasting energy trying to be who you were before the pain, before the betrayal, before the loss, before the disillusionment. You stop measuring your healing against the impossible standard of the person you imagine you should be. Instead, you begin to develop a strange but comforting intimacy with your own wounds. You learn that the scar on your heart isn't a character flaw, but proof that you loved deeply enough to be vulnerable. You discover that your chronic anxiety isn't a weakness but a supersensitive radar that protects you from real and imaginary dangers because you've been through storms that nearly destroyed you. Imagine John, a 40-year-old man who lost his job, his house, and nearly lost his family during a devastating financial crisis. For 3 years, he desperately tried to return to being the confident provider he thought he should be. He spent his last savings on winner mentality courses, forced smiles in job interviews, lied to friends about how he was feeling. It was only when he stopped trying to reclaim his old identity and began accepting his new reality that he discovered aspects of himself he had never explored. His vulnerability made him a more present father. His experience with adversity made him understand others' struggles in a way that had never been possible when his life was superficially perfect. The Czech writer understood that human existence is fundamentally absurd, but that it's precisely in this absurdity that we find our most authentic humanity. It's not despite our flaws that we're worthy of love and respect. It's through them. It's not when we're cured that we become interesting and deep. It's when we stop denying our problems and begin to dance with them in a more conscious and intentional way. There's a subtle but crucial difference between being broken and learning to exist broken. The first is a state of victimization. The second is an act of personal sovereignty. When you're just broken, you live in expectation that someone or something will fix you. You delegate your healing to therapists, romantic partners, professional achievements, spiritual experiences, chemical substances, anything external that promises to return you to the wholeness you believe you've lost. But when you learn to exist broken, you become the architect of your own experience. Even if that experience includes pain, confusion, imperfection, and vulnerability. Think about the beauty of a Japanese vase, repaired with the kintsugi technique, where cracks are filled with gold. The vase doesn't return to what it was before breaking. It becomes something completely different. A work of art that celebrates its own wounds, that transforms the break into beauty. Its strength doesn't come from denying it was broken, but from integrating that break into its new identity in a way that makes it more precious than it ever was when intact. Kafka lived this philosophy in flesh and bone. He never married, though he tried several times. He never felt completely comfortable in his insurance office job. He fought his entire life against tuberculosis, anxiety, and a persistent sense of social inadequacy. He asked for his manuscripts to be burned after his death, because he didn't consider them worthy of publication. However, it was precisely through these failures and inadequacies that he created one of the most profound and influential literary works in human history. He didn't write despite his neuroses, he wrote through them, transforming his own fragmentation into universal art. When you accept that you don't need to rebuild yourself, you free yourself from the tyranny of perfection. You stop comparing your healing with that of other people. You stop feeling guilty for not having overcome certain issues within the time frame society considers appropriate. You understand that some pains aren't meant to be solved, but to be integrated. Some anxieties aren't meant to be eliminated, but to be understood as part of your unique sensitivity. Some melancholy isn't clinical depression, but an appropriate response to the inherent complexity of the human condition. This doesn't mean passive resignation or conformity with unnecessary suffering. It means developing what psychologists call psychological flexibility, the ability to be present with your internal experience, even when it's uncomfortable, without being dominated by it or trying to change it desperately. It means learning to surf the waves of your own psyche instead of fighting against them until exhaustion. Maria, whom we mentioned before, discovered that her excessive sensitivity, which she had always considered a weakness, was actually a disguised superpower. She could perceive emotional nuances that others missed. She could offer comfort to people in pain, in a way that only someone who had navigated their own turbulent waters could do. Her ability to cry easily wasn't emotional instability. It was a natural release system that prevented her from accumulating psychic toxins like many people do. John discovered that his experience with financial bankruptcy had made him a much wiser and more sustainable entrepreneur. He no longer had the arrogance of thinking he could predict and control all aspects of a business. He created more conservative plans, built stronger support networks, treated employees with more respect because he knew what it was like to be in vulnerable positions. His perceived weakness, his financial anxiety and caution, became the foundation of a more ethical and resilient business approach. There's a moment in everyone's life when they finally understand that the pursuit of perfect wholeness is a seductive illusion that keeps them trapped in an eternal cycle of inadequacy. It's the moment when you look at your trembling hands during an anxiety attack and, instead of being ashamed, you think, these hands have written love letters, have consoled friends in mourning, have created small miracles in daily life. They tremble because they carry too much sensitivity, not because they're defective. It's the moment when you look at your tendency to avoid large social groups and think, maybe I'm not antisocial. Maybe I'm someone who functions better in deep individual connections, and that's not a limitation, it's a specificity. Kafka lived his entire life in this tension between wanting to fit social expectations and recognizing that his nature was fundamentally different from what society considered normal or healthy. He fought against his tendency toward isolation, tried to force himself to be more sociable, more conventional, more adjusted, but it was precisely when he stopped fighting these tendencies and began using them as creative material that he produced his most powerful works. His insomnia became the sacred writing time. His social anxiety became a unique lens through which he saw the absurdities of social structures. His feeling of always being displaced became the narrative voice that spoke directly to all others who feel like strangers in their own lives. Carmen's story perfectly illustrates this transformation. She spent 30 years trying to cure her extreme sensitivity to noise and visual stimuli. She spent fortunes on therapies, medications, mindfulness workshops, believing that if she could desensitize herself, She could finally live a normal life in open-space offices, at loud parties in crowded shopping centers. It was only when she stopped seeing her hypersensitivity as a problem and began treating it as information about her specific needs that she managed to create a career as an artist, working from home, with flexible hours, creating environments that nourished rather than drained her energy. Her limitation became the foundation of her success because she finally stopped fighting against herself and began working with her unique characteristics. Roberto faced a similar discovery with his propensity for melancholy. For decades, he believed he should be constantly happy and optimistic to be a valuable person. He forced smiles in work meetings, feigned enthusiasm at social events, hid his periods of melancholic introspection as if they were shameful personal secrets. But when he finally allowed himself to recognize that his melancholy was a form of emotional intelligence, an ability to perceive nuances and depths that perpetually optimistic people often miss, he discovered he could offer a unique type of wisdom and comfort to people going through difficult times. His ability to sit with sadness instead of trying to immediately fix or deny it became one of his most valuable qualities as a friend, father, and informal counselor. Modern culture teaches us to see any emotional discomfort as a problem that needs to be quickly resolved. Feeling anxiety? Take a sedative. Feeling sadness? Distract yourself with entertainment. Feeling loneliness? Seek company immediately. Feeling anger? Take a deep breath and think positive. But Kafka knew that difficult emotions aren't invaders to be repelled. They're messengers with important information about our internal experience and our relationship with the external world. They deserve to be heard, not silenced. When you learn to exist broken, you develop a unique capacity for intimacy with yourself. You stop treating your emotions as enemies and begin treating them as temporary guests who have something important to communicate. Your anxiety might be trying to alert you to situations that genuinely aren't safe for you. Your sadness might be processing real losses that need to be properly mourned. Your anger might be signaling that your boundaries have been violated and need to be reestablished. Your loneliness might be creating space for a type of self-knowledge that's only possible in quietude. There's a crucial difference between surrendering to breakage and learning to exist with it consciously. Passive surrender leads to victimhood, stagnation, using pain as an excuse not to engage with life. But learning to exist broken consciously is an act of profound creativity. It's recognizing that you can be in the process of healing and still live fully. It's understanding that you can carry trauma and still contribute meaningfully to the world. It's discovering that your wounds can become sources of wisdom, empathy, and strength that you never would have developed if your life had been perfectly easy. Kafka wrote in a letter, "I used to think I should seek happiness, but now I know I should seek only to be present with whatever is happening." This shift in perspective is revolutionary. Instead of constantly evaluating whether you're happy or sad, successful or failed, whole or broken, you simply ask, "What's happening now? How can I be present with this experience? What kind of creative response is this situation inviting me to give?" When you operate from this perspective, life becomes less about achieving ideal states and more about consciously navigating through an experience that is intrinsically impermanent and unpredictable. You stop waiting for the moment when you'll finally feel completely confident to start that creative project. You start the project with the limited confidence you have today and discover that action creates more confidence than waiting for confidence creates action. You stop waiting for the perfect relationship where there will never be conflicts or misunderstandings. You enter relationships as the imperfect person you are and learn to navigate conflicts with honesty and vulnerability, discovering that real and lasting relationships are built on the ability to repair ruptures, not on their absence. You stop waiting to feel completely prepared for new responsibilities or challenges. You accept opportunities knowing you'll learn along the way, that you'll make mistakes, that you'll have moments of doubt, and that this is part of the growth process, not evidence that you're not ready. Kafkaesque wisdom teaches us that inadequacy isn't a bug in the system of human existence, it's a feature. It's what keeps us humble, curious, connected to each other through the shared experience of all being unfinished projects, trying to do the best we can with the psychological and emotional material we have available. When you stop trying to hide your inadequacy and begin working with it transparently, you paradoxically become more competent and trustworthy, because people can trust that you're genuine about your limitations and strengths. Maria, whom we've mentioned several times, developed a type of professional leadership that was totally based on her ability to admit when she didn't know something, to ask for help when she needed it, to recognize others' talents without feeling threatened by them. Her perceived weakness, her humility and vulnerability, became her greatest strength as a manager because it created an environment where other people felt safe to also be honest about their limitations and contributions. John discovered that his experience with financial bankruptcy had made him a much wiser and more sustainable entrepreneur. He no longer had the arrogance of thinking he could predict and control all aspects of a business. He created more conservative plans, built stronger support networks, treated employees with more respect because he knew what it was like to be in vulnerable positions. His perceived weakness, his financial anxiety, and his caution became the foundation of a more ethical and resilient business approach. Carmen transformed her hypersensitivity into a thriving career as an environmental design consultant for neurodiverse people. Her ability to detect stimuli that other people didn't even notice made her an expert at creating spaces that worked for individuals with specific sensory needs. Her limitation became her most valuable professional specialization. Kafka's most radical insight is that you don't need to be healed to be useful. You don't need to be whole to be whole. You don't need to have solved all your problems to help other people with theirs. In fact, it's often the opposite. Your experience navigating your own difficulties is exactly what allows you to offer real and empathetic guidance to others who are facing similar challenges. Some of the most effective therapists are people who have been in therapy for years and still are. Some of the best teachers are people who continue to be curious students. Some of the most inspiring leaders are people who openly admit their limitations and surround themselves with people whose strengths complement their weaknesses. Strength doesn't come from not having weaknesses. It comes from knowing what your weaknesses are and working with them intelligently. You might be wondering, but what if I really have problems that need professional help? What if my brokenness isn't just a unique characteristic, but a destructive pattern that's hurting me and the people around me? This is an important and valid question. Learning to exist broken doesn't mean denying the need for growth, healing, or professional support when appropriate. It means approaching these needs from a place of self-compassion instead of self-aversion. The difference is subtle but crucial. When you seek help because you believe you're fundamentally defective and need to be fixed to be worthy of love and success, you approach healing as a total renovation project. You'll probably feel disappointed when you discover that therapy, medication, or other forms of support don't transform you into a completely different person. But when you seek help because you want to learn more effective ways to work with your natural tendencies, you approach healing as an intelligent optimization project. You use external resources to develop internal strategies that work with your nature, not against it. For example, if you have clinical depression, learning to exist broken doesn't mean romanticizing or passively accepting symptoms that are interfering with your ability to function. It means working with mental health professionals to develop strategies that recognize you may have a predisposition to depression that will require ongoing attention and care. And this isn't a personal failure, it's medical information that can be effectively managed. It means developing self-care systems that work preventively rather than just reactively. If you have destructive relational patterns, learning to exist broken means recognizing these patterns as adaptive strategies that made sense at some point in your life, but that may now be limiting or hurting you and others. It means working to understand the underlying needs these patterns were trying to meet, and finding more effective and less destructive ways to meet those needs. It doesn't mean accepting behaviors that cause harm. It means understanding that sustainable behavioral change usually requires understanding and compassion, not just willpower and self-criticism. Kafka knew that real change happens paradoxically. The more you accept where you are now, the more capacity you have to move consciously toward where you want to be. The more you fight against your current situation, the more energy you spend resisting instead of creatively navigating. This isn't complacency or resignation, it's intelligent strategy. It's recognizing that you have limited resources of attention and energy, and that it's more effective to use them to work with the realities you face than to spend them denying or fighting against those realities. When you finally stop trying to fix yourself and begin learning to exist consciously and intentionally exactly as you are, something surprising happens. You naturally begin to evolve, not because you're forcing yourself to change, but because you've stopped spending energy resisting yourself, and that energy becomes available for organic growth. It's like the difference between trying to force a flower to grow by pulling its petals and creating conditions where it can flourish naturally. You begin making decisions that honor your real needs instead of trying to impress others or live according to standards that never made sense for you. You begin seeking relationships and opportunities that work with your characteristics instead of against them. You begin developing ways to contribute to the world that leverage your unique strengths, including strengths that emerge directly from your experiences with difficulty and vulnerability. The final liberation isn't becoming a different person. It's stopping trying to be a different person and discovering who you really are when you allow yourself to exist without apologies or explanations. It's discovering that the person you are when you stop pretending to be someone you're not is much more interesting, capable, and worthy of love than any improved version you were trying to force yourself to become. Pause here for a moment. Have you ever felt like you were carrying pieces of yourself in a torn bag, desperately trying to prevent them from falling along the way? That exhaustion of trying to maintain a facade of being okay, when inside you know that some parts of you will never fit together perfectly again? If you know that feeling of living like a puzzle with missing pieces, write in the comments just, "I'm learning to exist." You don't need to explain anything more, because when you admit this, you're giving permission for other people to also stop pretending they're whole. And maybe, together, we can discover that our brokenness is exactly what connects us in a deeper and more authentic way. The inconvenient truth is that life isn't a renovation project where you can simply tear down emotional walls and build a completely new self. Life is more like inhabiting an old house that has history in the walls, creaks in the floor, leaks that appear during rainy seasons. You can make repairs, you can add new furniture, you can paint some rooms, but the fundamental structure remains. And there's profound beauty in learning to love a house with personality, with its imperfections and its stories, instead of constantly dreaming of a perfect house that never existed. Kafka wrote in his diary, "What we call evil is merely the necessity of our own development seen from the point of view of our personal needs." He was pointing to something revolutionary, that our most difficult experiences, our most problematic characteristics, our most painful traumas can be exactly the elements that lead us to our most authentic and powerful expression. Not because they're good in themselves, but because the way we learn to dance with them reveals aspects of our strength and creativity that we would never discover under ideal conditions. Consider for a moment the people you most admire, those for whom you feel the most affinity and respect. They're probably not the people who had perfect lives and never faced significant adversity. They're the people who went through real difficulties and emerged not as fixed versions of themselves, but as deeper, more compassionate, more authentic versions. They're people who carry their scars like medals of honor, not because they glorify suffering, but because they recognize that their ability to survive and find meaning through difficulty is evidence of an inner strength they didn't even know they possessed. There's a specific type of wisdom that only comes through direct experience with fragmentation. It's the wisdom of knowing you can feel completely lost and still find your way. It's the wisdom of discovering you can have your heart broken, and it can still love. It's the wisdom of learning you can carry trauma and still create beauty. It's the wisdom of understanding that your sensitivity, your introversion, your tendency toward melancholy, your obsessions, your phobias, your addictions in recovery, your complicated relationships with family, aren't manufacturing defects that need to be corrected for you to be worthy of a full life. The self-help culture promised us we can transform ourselves into anything we want to be. But Kafka knew this promise is both liberating and imprisoning. It's liberating because it gives us hope, but it's imprisoning because it creates the expectation that we should constantly be recreating ourselves to be worthy of love and success. The Kafkaesque truth is more subtle and, paradoxically, more liberating. You're already complete exactly as you are, including your incompleteness. Your brokenness isn't a problem to be solved. It's a characteristic to be consciously integrated. When Maria stopped trying to become the strong and independent woman she thought she should be, and began accepting that she was a woman who needed more alone time to process emotions, who functioned better with predictable routines, who felt drained in large social groups, who had days when she just wanted to stay in bed watching old movies, she discovered a peace she had never experienced when trying to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. She didn't become less ambitious or less capable. She became more efficient because she stopped fighting against her own nature. John discovered that his new cautiousness about money, his need to always have a plan B, his inability to make large impulsive purchases like he did before the crisis, weren't signs that he had become a smaller or more fearful man. They were signs that he had developed practical wisdom that protected him and his family from future imbalances. His financial anxiety wasn't neurosis, it was applied emotional intelligence. Kafka's genius was realizing that we constantly try to escape from ourselves, but that this escape is both impossible and unnecessary. The protagonist of the metamorphosis wakes up transformed into an insect and spends the entire story trying to return to being human. But what if the transformation wasn't a tragedy? What if it was an opportunity to experience existence from a completely different perspective? What if, instead of fighting against our own metamorphosis, we learned to inhabit it with curiosity and dignity? You don't need to love your limitations, but you can learn to work with them instead of against them. You don't need to celebrate your wounds, but you can stop feeling ashamed of them. You don't need to pretend your sensitivity is a strength when you experience it as vulnerability, but you can recognize that your ability to feel deeply is both a challenge and a gift. You don't need to transform your melancholy into forced gratitude, but you can discover that there's a melancholic beauty that always happy people will never be able to access. Kafka wrote at night, after spending the entire day working at a job he despised, dealing with family problems that emotionally exhausted him, trying to maintain romantic relationships that always seemed destined for failure. He didn't wait to become a better version of himself to create his work. He created through his inadequacies, using his chronic insomnia, his social anxiety, his hypochondria as fuel for a literary exploration that touched the universal experience of feeling like a stranger in your own life. The question isn't whether you're broken. The question is whether you have the courage to stop trying to fix yourself long enough to discover what kind of beauty can emerge when you finally allow yourself to exist exactly as you are. The question isn't whether you'll overcome your problems. The question is whether you can develop a more creative and less combative relationship with them. The question isn't whether you'll become the person you imagine you should be. The question is whether you can fall in love with the strange and imperfect person you really are. There's a question I know you've asked yourself, probably during one of those sleepless nights when your mind fires in all directions. Why can't I just be normal and be okay? And then comes that avalanche of examples of people who seem to have discovered the secret to a balanced and happy existence, while you continue stumbling over your own internal contradictions. If you've ever felt like this, like you were an unfinished project in a world full of people who have already found their answers, leave in the comments, "I'm still discovering myself." These words create a network of people who, like you, have the honesty to admit that the journey of self-knowledge is long, complex, and doesn't have a defined final destination. There's profound freedom in accepting that you won't rebuild yourself, because you don't need to rebuild yourself. There's immense relief in discovering that your most problematic characteristics might be exactly what makes you unique and interesting. There's a strange but real peace in stopping fighting aspects of your personality that you can't or don't want to change and beginning to work with them more intelligently and compassionately. This isn't giving up. It's strategy. This isn't conformity. It's wisdom. This isn't pessimism. It's deeply optimistic realism because it recognizes that you already have everything you need to live a meaningful and authentic life. You just need to stop wasting energy trying to be someone you're not and start investing that energy in becoming a more conscious and intentional version of who you already are. Kafka died young, at 40, never having seen the success of his work, never having married, never having felt completely at home in the world. But he left a legacy that continues to touch people almost a century later, because his words speak directly to the experience of feeling fragmented, inadequate, out of place. He didn't leave us recipes to fix ourselves. He left us permission to exist, broken with dignity. When you finally accept that you won't rebuild yourself, you can stop measuring your life by other people's standards and begin creating your own criteria for success and happiness. You can stop feeling guilty for needing more solitude than most people, for being more sensitive than your friends, for having more difficulty with superficial relationships, for preferring deep conversations to small talk, for feeling more comfortable with books than with people, for functioning better at night than in the morning, for needing more time to process changes, for having limited capacity for noisy or chaotic environments. You can begin to see these characteristics not as limitations you need to overcome, but as valuable information about how you function, information that can help you create a life that works with your nature instead of against it. You can stop trying to fit into social molds that never served you and begin sculpting a lifestyle that honors your specific needs and your particular ways of contributing to the world. The quiet revolution of learning to exist broken is that you finally stop waiting to feel ready to live your life. You stop postponing dreams until you feel more confident, relationships until you feel more stable, creativity until you feel more inspired. You begin working with the psychological material you have available today, with the limitations you carry today, with the energy level you have today, with the emotional capacity you possess today. And something extraordinary happens when you stop waiting for a better version of yourself to magically appear. You discover that the imperfect, confused, still in process version of yourself is capable of much more than you imagined. You discover you don't need to wait to feel brave to act courageously. You don't need to wait to feel wise to make wise decisions. You don't need to wait to feel loved to be loving. You don't need to wait to feel whole to live fully. If you've made it to the end of this reflection, it's because you recognize something true about the nature of human existence. You understand that life isn't a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived with the maximum presence and authenticity we can muster. This space exists for people who, like Kafka, know that the most important questions don't have simple answers, but still deserve to be explored with honesty and courage. Subscribe not because we promise to transform you into someone you're not, but because we offer companionship on the journey of discovering who you really are when you stop trying to be who you think you should be. Every week, we create a space for reflections that honor the complexity of being human in a world that prefers simplicity. Because your journey of self-acceptance, with all its contradictions and imperfections, is sacred exactly as it is. And maybe, learning to exist broken together, we can discover that our fragmentation doesn't separate us, but connects us in the shared experience of being imperfectly human in search of meaning and authentic connection.